What happens in Washington when everyone agrees something is a crisis? Well, when it comes to expiring Obamacare subsidies, nothing. We know a lot more about the oil tanker the U.S. seized off the coast of Venezuela, part of sanctions enforcement. This year's Nobel Peace Prize winner gives it a thumbs up. Kilmar Abrego Garcia ordered released. The presiding federal judge accused the Trump administration in this process of misleading, misrepresenting, and stonewalling. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. Healthcare policy in America is one unceasing story of woe. Costs go up, access always exists on a knife's edge, and is the first concern for anyone who has lost a job. And if you are self-employed or a gig worker with more than one or two jobs, or maybe three, it's a morass of costs, plans, and high deductibles. Employer-provided insurance is a bit more rational, but far from immune from higher premiums and encroaching limitations on care. Obamacare did not solve this, but it did drive down the number of uninsured Americans. When it was signed in 2010, just under 15% of all Americans were uninsured. Last year, with 45 million Americans enrolled in Obamacare plans or through expanded Medicaid access, that brought the percentage of uninsured down to 8%. Now, the issue you've heard about for weeks, the issue that was at the center of the longest government shutdown in history, soon to expire, enhanced Obamacare tax credits. Here's some important numbers. 24 million Americans have insurance through the Obamacare marketplace. Of that, 22 million, or 92%, receive these more generous subsidies. They were passed during COVID, and they expire, importantly, December 31st. The average Obamacare exchange enrollee will, starting next year, see a $700 per year premium increase. That, according to research from KFF. This deadline, not new news. Everyone has known about it. Republicans and Democrats describe this problem in their own ways, but they use the same word, crisis. Two Senate votes today kept the crisis at status quo. The GOP alternative, no extension of these subsidies, but direct payments to consumers, got 51 votes, needed 60. Kentucky Republican Rand Paul, by the way, voted no. The Democratic alternative, a 3-year extension of existing subsidies, also got 51 votes, also needed 60. All Democrats supported that, and interestingly, 4 Republicans. Susan Collins of Maine, Josh Hawley of Missouri, and Dan Sullivan and Lisa Murkowski, both of Alaska. That 4 Republicans voted with Democrats on this issue indicates the uneasy feeling some in the GOP have on this issue, the coming sticker shock and potential political fallout. We pick things up right there with Caitlin Huey-Burns on Capitol Hill. Caitlin, take it away.
Hey, Major. Well, you know, politics is unpredictable these days, but legislation on Capitol Hill is very predictable. And we knew heading into this vote that both of these bills were destined for failure because they didn't have the votes that they needed to get. And the policies were virtual non-starters on the opposing party's side. So you mentioned the Democrats' plan, which was an extension of those Obamacare subsidies for 3 years. It did get 4 Republican votes, as you mentioned, but most Republicans don't want to continue, in their words, to throw money at a problem. The problem, in their view, being the Affordable Care Act and how expensive it has become, in their view. Republicans want to put that money into a health savings account that Democrats call junk insurance. And so the parties are still very much at odds on what to do about a problem that they agree is a problem, and that is rising health care costs and the inevitable, which is that premiums are going to go up in about 20 days' time from now. And as all this finger pointing is going on Capitol Hill, there are very real people caught in the middle of all of this who want Congress to come to an agreement. I talked to 2 people who are on the Obamacare exchanges. One is a small business owner who relies on the program and also has 2 small children who rely on it. I also spoke to a woman who is from Virginia Beach area, and she had an accident, is in a wheelchair, relies on her health care coverage through the Obamacare exchanges to get the physical therapy she needs so that she no longer will have to be in a wheelchair. I want you to listen to how they described how they're feeling as they already are planning for those premiums to go up.
Healthcare is a complicated issue, without a doubt. I think one of my major frustrations is that no system is perfect. This is the best thing that's been offered. No system is perfect. There are going to be some people who are cheating and fraudulent, but that's not most of us. Most of us just want to be able to go to the doctor without panicking.
It's really scary. We are small business owners. We're doing well, but we're not wealthy. So an extra $300 a month has to come from somewhere. And groceries are already way more expensive than they have been. So, fewer Christmas presents, fewer luxury things like going to the movies or things like that.
Now, both of these women told me they are not expecting Congress to get around a solution by the end of the year, and they're already starting to adjust their budgets for the next year for themselves and their families to accommodate these higher prices, and they really are tightening their wallets. Now, Major, the question is what comes next, right? The House is going to put forward their own proposals next week, they say, but we don't yet know the details of that plan. And we are waiting to see whether today's vote does put a little fire under those lawmakers on the Senate side to come up with some kind of arrangement, because we did start to see today some small support for at least temporarily extending those health care subsidies. So we will see what next week brings, but we're coming close to that deadline and nowhere close to a conclusion.
And Congress will watch the President of the United States very closely to see if he decides to wade in on any of this. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so very much. We are following breaking news out of Indiana. The Republican-led state Senate voted against redrawn congressional map that would have helped the GOP in the state's only 2 congressional districts that Democrats currently hold. CBS News political reporter Hunter Woodall, a subject expert on redistricting nationwide, has been following everything in Indiana and joins me now. Hunter, it's great to have you with us. What happened?
Major, this is one of the more notable political moments we've seen, not just this year, not just in recent years, but I would say the entire Trump era of politics. Again, Indiana, Republican stronghold of a state. This is someplace where Democrats are really outnumbered. A 19-31 vote against redrawing these congressional maps. Significant, has come at enormous peril for some of these Republicans. In the state, we have seen so many political tensions. We've seen threats. We've seen swatting incidents reported. The underlying thing here has just been so powerful about this national impact coming in.
And not only did the president, but the president and the vice president today on social media both weighed in, basically telling Republicans, vote for this or else.
And that's the thing. I mean, you and I both know how some of these Midwestern legislatures can work. I didn't cover Indiana. I covered Kansas and Missouri. But sometimes there are folks, these are part-time legislatures, they don't like being told by Washington what to do. In the Trump era, we haven't seen that as much. But given all the tensions here, there was clearly on senators' minds as they spoke, big idea of what this could mean, not just for the U.S. history, but in Indiana history too, and what precedent it would set.
And I saw one of the Republicans who were opposed to this saying, look, we have lines, we drew them for a reason, and we'll let the voters sort out what they want to do with who will be the congressional majority in 2026 based on things we agreed to before. We don't need to change the lines just because the White House tells us to.
And that's the thing here. I mean, there's been this concern amongst Democrats and Republicans, is this just a race to the bottom? One Republican state redraws lines, a Democratic state answers. Back and forth, back and forth. This might be where a pause could happen. This might be a little bit of that political ceasefire. Okay, is this going to calm things down? Or is it going to be more normal after so many months over this year of tensions that have really just escalated?
And there are small, subtle signs of Republican pushback against President Trump. This may be yet another one of those small, subtle, but in this case, possibly very important signs of pushback. Hunter Woodall, thank you very much. Venezuela is accusing the United States of piracy. That's a quote, piracy, after U.S. forces seized an oil tanker off the Venezuelan coast. Attorney General Pam Bondi released this video. It says the tanker was used to transport sanctioned oil to Iran. President Trump suggested yesterday the United States would keep the oil. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie Daggett joins me now. Charlie, we've learned a lot more today. What have we learned?
Yeah, well, first of all, this is a multi-agency operation. So it had to do with the Department of Treasury, which kicked it off, the FBI, part of the investigation, Department of Homeland Security. But the video that you saw, that's where you got highly trained special operations forces that are embedded with the Coast Guard. Now, they were helped out and backed up by sailors and Marines that came off the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft. So those helicopters that you're seeing there in that video, it would have come from them. And that's where the backup came. Now, that tanker is now under U.S. control, under U.S. forces. We've actually been tracking it. It has turned north toward the United States. And the decision will be made. The Trump administration, anyway, has said, look, this is, I assume the oil is going to be ours. It won't be quite that straightforward. There are certain legal processes to look into, but that's where it stands now. And we have been tracking where that had been. In fact, our colleagues for CBS News out in the Hong Kong Bureau around Malaysia were tracking not only this ship, that's the skipper, but several ships on the way from Venezuela and places like Iran to transfer fuel and oil to China. And it's just happening there in the open seas. They switch off their electronic transmitters. They even put like sheets and blankets over the name of their ship. They change their names from time to time. And the Trump administration says there are plenty more of these sanctioned ships out there, maybe as many as 80, maybe as many as 30 inside the areas around Venezuela itself. And, you know, the gloves are off. They've threatened to take those too.
So this is, as you just described, Charlie, a pretty elaborate sanctions evading process. And the administration is saying, we're no longer going to leave it to diplomatic means to try to resolve that or turn the other way. We're going to board these vessels. Yeah. And you know, Major, I think we have to keep in mind, this is Operation Southern Spear. This is a drug interdiction operation. And the amount of the capacity and the amount of military hardware gives Defense Secretary Hegseth and President Trump, to a larger degree, all kinds of options. But in terms of giving a game plan, there are lawmakers who are saying, well, wait a minute, is this drug interdiction? Is this oil interdiction? Are we at war with Venezuela? We've just learned there's another squadron of F-35 fighter jets that are now headed to Puerto Rico. We saw F-18 fighter jets in Puerto Rico. We saw in the past couple of days more Marines landing in Puerto Rico. So they're gearing up for a fight. But what that fight entails and what it means and what they can do is still unknown. But I can tell you this with confidence. If there were to be a land invasion, you don't have anywhere near enough troops for anything like that. You've got Tomahawk cruise missiles that can hit Venezuela, inside Venezuela. You've got the F-18s. You're going to have to take out Venezuela's defense systems. Those are Russian defense systems, which are fully capable. So all of the pieces are in place, but perhaps the plan isn't in place or hasn't been shared as to what exactly the president and the defense secretary plan to do. Charlie D'Agata, thank you so very much. CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and moderator of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, joins me now. Speaking of that word, sanctions, more sanctions today, Margaret.
Yes, actually, Major, this kind of financial chokehold is something the Trump administration likes to use, but this is a little bit different because it goes alongside this seizure of the tanker. There are 6 shipping companies. They span from the South Pacific through the Caribbean through Europe. And energy analysts have told us that the decision to board this ship, and the sanctioning here suggests maybe they'll do this on other vessels. The Trump administration can do this at this moment in time because oil prices are low. So taking more oil and supply off the market isn't necessarily going to inflate the price dramatically. So he can afford to do it. And then when he's looking at Venezuela, Venezuelan exports have been up despite the sanctions. So they've been able to use these methods to continue to bring revenue into the Maduro regime.
To evade the sanctions.
To evade the sanctions and keep the Maduro regime in place. And so to the point Charlie was making in there, if this is about drug interdiction, that's not what's on those ships. Right. And if this is about taking out the Maduro regime, then the legal premise for that has not been laid out, certainly to Congress. But these sanctions are targeted at the Maduro family as well. Among the people on that list Treasury released were the narco nephews. Right. There are 3 individuals, nephews of Maduro's wife. 2 of them had served time in U.S. prisons. They had actually been convicted on drug trafficking charges years ago. The Biden administration released them as part of a prisoner swap to free some unjustly detained Americans very recently. So now they're back on a U.S. list. Are they of value? Former officials told me probably not, since they were in U.S. custody before the information was gathered from them. But it's another finger that points at the Maduro regime and says, we are putting pressure on all of you as well. So brings us back to, what's the end goal here?
When I talk to lawmakers, and I'm sure you have the same conversations, Margaret, they say yes, it's about drugs, yes, it's about sanctions, but more than anything else, this is an elaborate pressure campaign on Maduro to get him to leave.
It is a pressure campaign to get him to leave, but that is not what the president is explaining to the country or to Congress. It is not the legal premise that has been briefed to Congress, which is very specific to these fast-moving drug boats. So if there is a policy, it hasn't been articulated and explained in the way that it seems to be taking shape. We're putting these pieces together. Right. And it's interesting because if this is about bringing the Maduro regime to its knees, going after their revenue source is potentially an effective way to do that. Is the goal to flip generals so that they turn against Maduro and have some kind of coup? There have been unsuccessful ones in the past. Cutting off their revenue, another successful way to do this. The administration would argue they're also trying to cut off the drug supply, which is a revenue source. But what is that end game? And then the alternative leader, who is someone who is viewed as legitimate by the world community, Maria Corina Machado, is now in Oslo, Norway, having received the Nobel Peace Prize. If she is to go back and lead the country, she has to somehow figure out a way to get back into it. But is that part of the plan?
And
that has not been explained.
To your point, she endorsed the seizure.
She has.
She said, look, this is part of a pressure campaign, and I'm okay with it.
She is saying that. Somewhat ironically for a Nobel Peace Prize winner to say, I embrace the use of force in limited measures. But back to the U.S. interests here, we went and looked at Mark Esper, the former defense secretary's book. A team member on Face the Nation, Alana Lease, did this, pulled the excerpts from when this was discussed during the first administration, seizing these ships. And the defense secretary at the time said, we can do that. We have the ability to do that in a military operation or through the Coast Guard. But here are the questions I have. And among them was, what happens if the crew on board resists us boarding? What are those rules of engagement? And the reason you ask those questions in that setting is to lay out the what ifs, because as soon as you put service people in harm's way, and by definition, using them in this way puts them potentially at risk, it brings us closer to conflict. And so considering that this is an escalation, and it's an interesting change in strategy, and we know that administration officials were on the Hill briefing Congress behind closed doors recently. What's the end game? What's the plan? We're going to continue to talk about it.
To your point, when they belayed down from those helicopters, they had guns drawn.
Yes.
For a reason. Margaret Brennan, outstanding stuff as always. Thank you so much. The attorney for Kilmar Abrego Garcia tells CBS News that he is officially out of his ICE custody. This after a federal judge in Maryland today ordered that he be released. Jake Rosen joins me now. Jake, this is a breaking news story. Not that the order came down. That happened earlier today, but the release has been achieved. Walk us through what we know.
Well, Major, what we know right now is that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is likely on his way out of an ICE detention center in Pennsylvania, potentially going towards where his family lives in Maryland, potentially somewhere else. That we do not know. And this all stems from this ruling earlier today in which a federal judge said that there was no order for his removal, and thus the Department of Justice and Homeland Security cannot continue holding him in ICE detention. We should remind our audience that he was deported to El Salvador as part of those flights back in March. Attorneys representing him, after his wife raised alarms about his whereabouts, said that she had seen him in some of the pictures that were released from the PR put out by the Salvadoran government. And as a result, he was one of very few men who were able to go to court in the United States to stand up for due process. This judge, it only took, as justice moves slow in these cases, 7 or so months to get to this point. It took him being brought back here to face criminal charges, and then it took him being re-detained by ICE after a judge in that criminal case said that the Department of Justice did not have enough evidence that he would potentially be violent if he were to roam the streets or to go back to Maryland, and ICE re-detained him after that judge freed him from pretrial detention there.
Jake, we ask a lot of you in this justice space because many things happen day to day. Another thing happened today, different subject. Another grand jury presented evidence potentially to indict sitting New York Attorney General Letitia James, and that grand jury said no. Catch us up.
Yep, it's the second time in a week. A grand jury was set up this week in Alexandria, Virginia. That's where a group of Virginians said no, that they did not buy by over 50% to indict Letitia James for charges of alleged mortgage fraud. This same thing happened last week in Norfolk, Virginia, when the Department of Justice tried again. They've tried twice and failed twice now. Why, Major, do they keep continuing to do this? Well, it's because a federal judge from South Carolina was brought into Virginia to hear arguments last month on whether or not Lindsey Halligan, that former White House aide who was put into the Eastern District of Virginia to directly enact what President Trump had ordered on Truth Social to Attorney General Pam Bondi to prosecute his enemies. That included Letitia James, that includes Senator Adam Schiff, that includes former FBI Director James Comey. The Comey and Letitia James indictments were dismissed by this judge, and the Department of Justice has not appealed that ruling because the Trump administration's strategy for continuing this way of appointing prosecutors without congressional and Senate approval has failed in the appeals court, in district courts. And so now the Department of Justice did not comment to us when we asked if they're going to continue to do this. But our colleague Scott McFarlane reports that at least one Trump administration official said that it is likely the Trump administration is going to continue to attempt to indict Letitia James in Virginia in the coming days and weeks as we head to the new year.
And we will follow that if that transpires and what a grand jury does or doesn't do about it. Jake Rosen, thank you so very much. Still to come on the Takeout. It's already been a busy show. We got more coming to you. Private villas and luxury cars. CBS News exclusive report on the Minnesota fraud scheme and where funds went that were supposed to go to feed hungry children. Also, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem briefs lawmakers on global security threats facing the United States, how she defended Trump administration's aggressive immigration enforcement. Welcome back to the Takeout. In an exclusive report, CBS News obtained dozens of files and photos that provide some pretty sharp insight into the massive COVID-era fraud scheme in Minnesota. Among items purchased through this fraudulent effort, luxury cars, private villas, lots more. CBS Minnesota investigative reporter Jonah Kaplan joins me now from WCCO in Minnesota for more on his reporting. Jonah, take it away.
Well, we're talking about our money. We're talking about taxpayer money that should have been used to feed hungry kids, that should have been used to help the homeless and people that needed housing assistance, that should have been used to support children with behavioral issues and autism. And here's what it was spent on instead: luxury cars, trips to the Maldives, 21-karat gold necklaces bought on a shopping spree in Dubai, and a beautiful two-lot area right on one of the lakes here in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And this is just one of the case files that we were able to obtain. So we're talking about a case that continues to grow. 87 people charged thus far, 61 convicted and counting. And investigators tell us we are not even at the end of the beginning of this investigation.
And Jonah, how'd you get the case file?
We asked for it. It's also about, of course, building relationships, because this was a lot of exhibits that maybe were presented during the trial. These were cases that were first introduced in 2022, but in the way that it was described by investigators, it was kind of like an iceberg. You see a little bit of what's above, right, above the water, but then typically an iceberg is so much larger below the surface and what you can't see. And that's true, that frauds kind of give birth to other frauds. And this is something that not only has materialized, but metastasized. And this is something that we've been talking with investigators a lot, especially over the last few weeks and months, and especially since President Trump brought this back into the national spotlight. Again, these were first indictments were brought down in 2022, but we've had recent indictments even from a few weeks ago. So again, we continue to see more of this investigation, and we continue to reveal more of what's been done with this federal taxpayer money.
Jonah, as you know, as President Trump has talked about it, he's mentioned terrorism in Somalia and this fraud scheme. What do we know?
Well, this is an important discussion and nuance, because in the investigation so far, I've talked with several federal investigators and state investigators, there is no evidence of a direct payment between any one of these suspects charged, any one of these perpetrators. It's not like they wrote out a check to Al-Shabaab in Somalia or any other ISIS or Al-Qaeda affiliated group. No money directly given to a terrorist network. However, if, let's say, you're sending money to family who lives in Somalia or in Mogadishu or in an area that maybe is controlled by an entity like Al-Shabaab, well, if they collect taxes, you send $10,000 and they collect a tax of $1,000, well, was that you supporting a terrorist organization? Not really, but that money still wound up in their hands. And so that's the kind of question that remains unanswered for investigators. And we also know from some of these new documents that we've obtained, there's more than $1 million, at least in this one case file, that were wire transferred to China. And that was not the final destination. But if you need that information from China, you're going to have to ask Beijing for it. And they're not exactly willing to give up that information.
Jonah, you keep digging. I know you will. And thank you for that reporting and valuable context. Really appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
A hearing on global threats facing the United States turns into a pretty aggressive debate over immigration enforcement. Next, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and some tense exchanges with Democrats. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Welcome to the Conversation Corner. Love to be here. Here is a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. Michael Jordan's antitrust lawsuit against NASCAR came to a halt today when a judge announced the two sides had agreed to a settlement. Jordan's racing team, along with another team, alleged NASCAR illegally kept too much of the money generated by the sport. In the end, NASCAR agreed to reverse its hardline stance, been around for a long time, and create permanent team charters, which would be the equivalent of the franchise business model used in other sports. Other terms of the settlement, including any financial damages, well, those have not been released. Disney has agreed to a 3-year licensing agreement with OpenAI. It's worth $1 billion, and it will allow users of Sora, an artificial intelligence video tool, to create short videos using more than 200 copyrighted characters from Disney, Marvel, Pixar, and Star Wars. Some of the characters available through the deal include, as you might expect, Mickey Mouse, Cinderella, Darth Vader, plenty of others. The agreement includes limits on character behavior. This, we are told, to keep the content kid-friendly. That deal, or that provision, hasn't prevented backlash online with concerns over what users could still make some of these beloved characters do. I will leave that to your vivid imagination. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem testified today at a House hearing on global threats facing the United States, those threats. And she spent a lot of time, as we might have imagined, going into this, in several contentious exchanges with Democrats over immigration enforcement. Here's just one of them.
You haven't been telling us the truth. Look, there have been at least 170 known cases of citizens being arrested or detained by federal immigration agents this year alone. This is the truth. Are you lying to the American people right now by denying these reports?
We have never once detained or deported an American citizen. We have not held them and charged them.
CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd joins me now here in the Conversation Corner. Sam, great to have you. We'll get to the immigration in a second, but you've done this process, meaning briefed senior Homeland Security officials for this very conversation. How did you evaluate what you heard overall on global threats to the United States?
Well, let's just talk about why this is important. These worldwide threat hearings are meant to inform not just Congress, but also the American people. That's why they're public. And the goal is to lay out the biggest threats facing the country so that Americans know what to watch out for. What transpired today, and unfortunately, Major, what has happened before, is that this became more of a political circus than an actual threat briefing. And you saw accusations over Biden-era policies really infuse most of the briefings that were delivered by the Trump administration officials that testified.
Any kernels of insight that were valuable among this food fight politically?
There was a lot of focus on two topics, immigration and counterterrorism, and what Trump administration officials view as a convergence between the two. That narrative has been pervasive in most of the strategy documents coming out of the Trump administration and most of the testimony to date. but there's a very heavy focus on how bad actors are trying to exploit or tried to exploit Biden-era immigration policies to come to the United States and wreak havoc. There was a lot of contradictory statements, however, on the terrorism-related front. You had some officials saying that young Americans have been radicalized with no ties to terrorist organizations online, lone actors. Then a whole line of argument about the Taliban and other Afghan-based terrorist groups infiltrating the Afghan withdrawal process. So a lot of contradictory statements on the terrorism-related front.
And to that soundbite that we came in on, there have been lots of reports around the country of either green card holders or American citizens for some period of time being ensnared in these immigration enforcement procedures.
There are literally specific cases of Americans, lawful permanent residents, green card holders, and others actually being arrested and taken into custody by immigration enforcement. In fact, I think another representative during this testimony actually played a video clip of one of those. So Secretary Noem was actually factually inaccurate in saying that that had never happened, and also factually inaccurate in terms of saying that the administration had never violated federal court orders. We actually saw that happen with an aircraft that took off with individuals on it in removal proceedings earlier this year.
There was also some laudatory comments from Republicans about a dramatic reduction in illegal border crossings and the proper enforcement at the border from their perspective as compared to the Biden administration.
Yeah, a lot of contradictions. Democrats on the committee were decrying the really interior immigration enforcement posture from the Trump administration.
But not decrying the securing of the border very much.
No, but it is a fact that border encounters have literally drastically diminished under the Trump administration that started under Biden. But that was a very heavy focus for Republican members, whereas Democrats were focused on the interior enforcement against individuals that may be here unlawfully, but that don't appear to pose a security threat.
And in many cases, don't have criminal records outside of their violating immigration law in this country. Sam Vinograd, always a pleasure. Thank you so very much. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado out of hiding. We will take you inside the operation that got her from Venezuela to Norway to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. It's a heck of a story. You'll hear it next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has made her first public appearance after 11 months in hiding. She's in hiding because she fears for her life inside Venezuela. Machado arrived in Oslo, Norway, after her daughter accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on her behalf. CBS News has learned quite a bit about the difficult and intricate operation to get her there. Our Lilia Luciano spoke with the head of the mission that achieved that pretty surprising result.
The most dangerous thing in operations of any kind are moments of transition.
What was that transition like in this case?
Very complicated, very complicated. We had multiple transitions in multiple domains, through multiple vehicles, through multiple modes of transportation. Again, there was a land component, a maritime component, and an aviation component. And at any one of those moments, at any one of those transition moments, and there are transition moments through those areas, through that pipe, if you will, through that mechanism, which is what we call it, a mechanism, everything and anything can go wrong.
Now Lilia joins me from the CBS Broadcast Center to break it all down. Lilia, take it away.
Well, Major, I was just so compelled by every single detail that Brian Stern told me about that exit. I had been thinking about that. I specifically was curious about the timeline. Of course, it's an incredibly complicated operation. What I know from what he told me is that it took, that Maria Corina Machado had to hide, had to be not just disguised, but hidden so that nobody would see her, that there were many checkpoints that she went through undetected without giving me too much detail. But my main question was, okay, she made it to Oslo. Why couldn't she make it to the actual ceremony? Her daughter had to read her acceptance address. This is what he told me.
I don't look at this operation as getting Maria to a ceremony on time. I look at this as saving a freedom fighter's life, saving a mother's life. I don't look at it as making sure she, making sure she gets the Nobel Peace and all that other thing, all that. certainly important. Certainly, I'm not minimizing it, but when we're in the middle of the operation, nobody really cares about the cameras at that moment. We're all just trying to stay alive.
He says it took about 4 days before this all went down that he started planning, that he started working on it, that she was in the water with him on a boat for something like 12 to 13 hours. And prior to that, there was an escape plan on land, not counting the maritime one, that lasted something like 15 or 16 hours. Of course, we finally saw Maria Corina Machado reach Oslo, greet her supporters, her allies, the presidents of Panama, Argentina, of Paraguay, and Ecuador, who were there to greet her, and of course hug her children. That's one thing that Brian told me, is that he told me I was starstruck. I had never rescued a Nobel Peace Prize winner, or any kind of Nobel Prize winner, or anybody at that level of recognition. And that was, on the one hand, a huge challenge to go undetected, given the amount of intelligence from multiple countries that are allies of Venezuela who could have been watching. The other aspect of that was, he said, how honored he was. I also asked him, how involved was the United States? Were you directly coordinating or following the guidance of the U.S. military? Look, you're in the Caribbean with all of this military escalation that we're seeing. Were you coordinating? He said he would send information up, but that there wasn't any direct coordination. I also asked, did U.S. taxpayers pay for this? He said no. It was private donors. No U.S. officials paid for any part of this rescue.
Important details. Lily Luciano, great stuff. Really love it. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, Major.
Charlie Kirk's widow, Erika, is pushing back against conspiracy theories related to her husband's assassination. High-profile podcaster Candace Owens, a former friend of Charlie's, is one of the loudest voices pushing those theories. Here is what Kirk told CBS News editor-in-chief Barry Weiss for an upcoming town hall.
The podcaster Candace Owens, okay? At one time, a friend of Charlie's, at one time an employee of Turning Point. She has been one of the main peddlers of these conspiracies, and she is making a huge amount of money on it. She is building her business off of these lies. What do you want to say to her and the other people that are putting these lies out into the world right now?
Stop. That's it. That's all I have to say. Stop.
We invite you to tune in to CBS this Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, for the full 1-hour Erika Kirk Town Hall event, moderated by CBS News editor-in-chief Barry Weiss. The appearance comes days after the release of Stop in the Name of God, Why Honoring the Sabbath Will Transform Your Life, the book her husband finished writing just before his death. And we'll be right back. Welcome back. Political panel time. Let me introduce them to you. Aaron McGuire and CBS News contributor Chuck Rocha here with me at the desk. Aaron, Republican strategist. Chuck, Democratic strategist, former advisor to Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, and excellent cowboy hat wearer. Okay, the original plan for this conversation was to start with an interview I was to do today for this program with Jasmine Crockett, who just announced her candidacy for the Democratic nomination for Senate in Texas. We had that booked. We had it promoted. We had it promised. And Congresswoman Crockett backed out about an hour before we were supposed to do that. She is invited back on the program, but I want to note, and she knows I'm going to do this, that we had it booked, she was scheduled, and she backed out. So evaluate, because I know you know a lot about Texas politics, Chuck, Jasmine Crockett's entrance into this race, and whether you think it's a good idea or not.
Well, it's definitely shaken up the race. Colin Allred, who ran last time, who raised $30 million. He raised a lot of money.
Set it all on fire.
That's right, and lost. Was coming back to run again. But if you've already raised $30 million, Erin knows this. She runs lots of campaigns.
Yeah, that's right. It's still doing it.
That's $30 million of name ID that is free. Like, now you build off of that. And just because she got in the race, now he's decided not to run, and he's going to go back and run for Congress.
Right, he was on the program earlier this week explaining that.
All of that is just a big shakeup.
So James Tallarico's still in the race, not as well known, but pretty well liked.
And has raised an unbelievable amount of money again.
Right.
And let me tell folks about what the Democratic primary makeup looks like in the state. You have to win a primary before you win a general election. And in the primary, almost 50% of the electorate is made up of white folks. 21% is made up of African Americans, and 30% is made up of Latinos, and about 2% Asian. That's the last off your election. So it gives you an idea of where they would try to draw from to actually win a primary.
Right. Aaron, lots of Republicans could not be happier that Jasmine Crockett entered this race.
Right. I think it takes away any of the electability argument in the Republican primary, right? I think that there are plenty of people who have been out there talking about who is in the race. But for Jasmine Crockett to enter, and one thing about her and Tallarico is they almost parallel raise money. They both brought in $6 million recently in the last quarter. He is actually a very formidable fundraiser for just being a state rep or state senator or whatever.
State rep, yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's very formidable money versus a federally elected official. But it seems that sometimes national Democrats, including Jasmine Crockett, confuse progressive enthusiasm and online noise for electoral strength. And there continues to be this big blue dream of Texas, this fever dream that Democrats have. You can go back to Beto, who lit loads of millions of dollars
came close
on
in
that,
2018.
but lost. You can go back to the woman in the sneakers from Texas who also lost. You can go back to Colin Allred. Democrats will do what they always do. They will pour millions and millions and millions of dollars into a state that they will not be able to change the electorate in this cycle to be able to win. Jasmine Crockett's first message coming out in one of the first interviews she did was, we don't need to win Trump voters. Donald Trump won Texas with 56% of the vote. If she believes that she is going to only win on how Kamala Harris did, congratulations, you are proving my point about just lighting millions of dollars on fire. And if I was a low-dollar Democrat donor, which is the base of Democrat dollars, they are very good at the low dollar, $5 every month, keeping it up, I would be furious to yet again see somebody hard charge a primary only to waste money and diminish the opportunity for somebody else that might be able to build a coalition because the self-importance is why they're running.
Chuck, I'm going to take this from Texas nationally. The assumption has to be for Jasmine Crockett that 2018 for Beto O'Rourke was a good wave year for Democrats. First midterm after Trump won in 2016. This will be better. Therefore, the wave will be higher, which gives her a probability that didn't exist for Beto.
There's some positive energy out there for sure. And it's not polls. It's not pontification. It's actually people voting. In Miami, just a week ago, there was this big race. And
Mayor-elect Higgins was on this program last night.
She won.
First in 30 years.
30 years. And in New Jersey and Virginia, there's definitely been an overperformance. No matter what, you can say that not the same people vote. I get all that. I've been running campaigns a long time. But there's definitely momentum there.
Something in the air.
Or we would be losing. I would tell you that Virginia is not a blue state. They have a Republican governor for all of you at home.
Chuck, you and I both know that historically speaking, Virginia is much more purple-blue than it is red.
They have a Republican governor.
There's something in the air.
There is a midterm coming up, and we are looking at a unified Republican White House, Senate, and House. And right now, what are you hearing nationally in the argument? About Obamacare subsidies. Why? Because that was a Democrat proposal, Obamacare. But Republicans will carry the mantle on the cost for a Democrat-named and Democrat-led piece of legislation that Republicans have tried to overturn for decades.
So they're going to lean into that. They're going to be okay with the expiring of these subsidies.
They're not, and they shouldn't be.
Okay.
Because you know what? Not allowing an off-ramp for the failure of Democrats is a failure of Republican leadership.
Republicans have weakened this bill from the moment that it got passed. They've taken all the subsidies away from it, all the money that was going into it. They've taken it out.
Insurance companies. Why would you continue to make the insurance companies rich? That doesn't help people.
One after another. Now they want to retreat back to something they don't know nothing about.
It seems like we have a better understanding of it when it comes to actual affordability conversation.
That's why you get your butt whooped in elections. I know it hurts, but I was the first one to tell you that Trump
won. You and I both know that we get along so well, but it is disingenuous to say that the Obamacare conversation is what's going on in any of the elections we've seen right now.
Aaron gets the last word.
Oh, yeah, I know that
gets the last word.
I get paid around here. I get to do it last.
Aaron McGuire, Chuck Rocha. I get paid more, Chuck. I decide. Happy Thursday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally. The Daily Report is next.